we'll go ahead and get started. And yeah, feel free to interact with us in the chat. Buju, Mijwakwe Ndigu, Mikizi Indudem, Nagajunang and Dunjaba. Hello, my name is Caitlin, or Big Woman. I am Eagle. I'm Anishinaabe. I'm a direct descendant of the Fond du Lac Band. I'm calling from Nagajunang in the Cloquet, Minnesota area. And I use she, they pronouns. I'm the Upper Midwest Indigenous Seakeepers Network Coordinator with Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. And I'll be the webinar moderator today. So I'm joined today by my colleague, Maria Blanco, who will be co-facilitating the session through the webinar chat. Maria, I'll hand it to you for a brief intro.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Mireya Blanco. I'm located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm Chiricahua Apache and Rada Murray. I am the current Southwest ISKIN Program Coordinator here at NAFSA, and I'm a co-owner of a gourmet mushroom farm called Midnight Disco Fungi. So thank you for joining us today, and just another little thing. If you have any questions, feel free to ask it in the chat or use the Q&A option. Thank you.
All right, again, Buju, welcome to Gather to Grow Grants 101. So for today's session, we partnered with Intertribal Agriculture Council, and we're honored to have them with us, and we're just really grateful for the work that they do to support tribes and native producers across Turtle Island. And yeah, with that, I will hand it over to the IAC team to introduce themselves and to begin today's presentation. And again, Miigwech, thank you so much for being here.
I can kick us off with introductions. Buju, good afternoon, good morning, everybody, depending on where you are. My name is Joey Tallier, enrolled member of the Secaucus Chippewa community based in northern Wisconsin. I am one of the Great Lakes Technical Assistance Specialists, which we'll learn a little bit more about in the second part of this presentation. But happy to be here and happy to, yeah, I guess just get to know you all and make connections where possible. And I can pass it over to Abby.
Ani Buju, everybody. I'm Abby Baraglio. I'm a descendant of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota. I now live in the snowy Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I am another technical assistant specialist with IAC serving the Great Lakes region. So while Joey and I are specific to the Great Lakes region, I know that I see there's a lot of folks coming in from all over Indian country. So we've got technical assistant specialists and staff all over the nation. So really excited to make connections where we can, talk more about grants and getting y'all funding, which is really important as we advance food sovereignty. So really excited. I will pass it over to Dominique to get us going.
Hi, I'm Dominique Nault. I am Chippewa Cree from Rocky Boy, Montana. I'm currently based in Seattle, Washington, so that's where I'm calling from. I am the Regenerative Economies Program Specialist, and so the program is a national program, so we assist all over. And we could go to the next slide and get started. So the Regenerative Economies, the IAC's Regenerative Economies program promotes and highlights the benefits of investing in Indian agriculture while providing individualized assistance on business and finance solutions that will promote healthy and regenerative economic growth throughout Indian country. And next slide. We support producers through business and strategic planning by helping them set clear goals, develop business plans, and map out long-term growth strategies. And our financial services support kind of focuses on budgeting, credit building, and connecting producers to lenders and funding opportunities. And we also assist with risk management, disaster assistance, just by guiding producers through the USDA programs and emergency relief resources when these challenges arise. And additionally, we help producers explore value-added and market development opportunities, including expanding markets, participating in cooperatives, and creating new income streams for their products. Go to the next slide. So let's start with the basics. When we talk about grants, a lot of people think about free money, but in reality, grants are like investments from funders. Grants are not loans and do not need to be repaid, but they do come with expectations, which are clear goals, reporting, and accountability. A grant is money provided to support a specific project or activity. And for agriculture, this could be expanding your operation, investing in conservation practices, recovering from disaster, or launching something new like a value-added product. And some type of grants are federal grants, and these come from agencies like USDA. Examples include EQIP, the Value Added Producer Grant, or Specialty Crop Block Grant. And these could be competitive and usually require a lot of detail in your application, but the funding amounts are often larger. And then there's state and tribal grants, and these are often smaller in size, but they are more locally focused and sometimes easier to access. They're designed to meet the needs of producers and communities close to home. And then foundation or nonprofit grants, these come from private funders or charitable organizations, and they're a great fit for community-driven projects. Food sovereignty work, or youth and education initiatives. And another important piece to think about is your entity type. Are you applying as an individual farmer or rancher, a business, a nonprofit, a cooperative, or a tribal government? And so different type of entities qualify for different types of grants. For example, a tribal government might be able to access larger infrastructure or community-wide food system grants. A nonprofit could apply for foundation funding to support a food sovereignty project, or a cooperative might be able to be eligible for grants that strengthen shared marketing or processing facilities. And then individual producers or farm businesses can often apply for USDA, cost share, or value added grants. And so knowing what type of entity you are and what grants are open to you is a key first step before you start applying. Next step. So think of applying for a grant as a process with stages, like from idea to reporting. Understanding the cycle of grants can help you stay prepared in any step of the process. So number one, planning and readiness. This is where you define your project. What problems are you solving? How does it align with your business goals? At this stage, you are also gathering key documents, so your farm number, financials, budget, just so when you're ready, when the opportunities are open. And then number two, searching and identifying opportunities. Not every grant is a good fit, so it is important to look for funding that matches your needs. For native producers, this could be USDA programs, tribal grants, or foundation focused on food sovereignty, conservation, or community health. And then third is application. This is where your strategic planning really pays off. You'll write a project narrative, develop a budget, show how you'll use the funds. And remember, funders want clarity and detail. And number four, the review and award. Funders evaluate your application against others. So if awarded, you'll get a grant agreement that spells out responsibilities. If not, don't get discouraged. You could often reapply or use the feedback to strengthen your proposal, which is highly recommended. So you could apply for other opportunities with that using that feedback. Implementation, this is carrying out the project as promised. Keeping good records of expenses, activities, and the progress is key here. Documenting all those little successes along the way. And then the reporting and closeout. Almost all funders require reports. They want to know what you accomplished, what impact it's had, and how the funds were used. Strong reporting could build trust and just open the doors for future grants. So the life cycle is kind of like full circle from planning to applying to reporting. and then using that experience to prepare for the next opportunity. Next slide. So why does strategic planning matter? Funders are not just handing out these checks. They want to invest in projects that are well thought out, realistic, and aligned with their mission. And strategic planning helps you prepare for that. When you have a strategic plan, you're able to clearly state your vision and goals, and then back up your ideas with budgets and timelines, and how your project will make a difference in your operations and your community. So funders are looking for three big things. They're looking for clarity. Do you know exactly what you want to do? Capacity. Do you have the people and the systems in place to make it happen? And then the impact. How will this project help your business and your community in the long run? So a strong plan just makes it easier for you to answer these questions, and it makes a proposal stand out in a competitive pool of applicants. Next slide. So now let's look at the essential components of a strong grant application. Most funders will ask for the same core pieces, even if the format is a little bit different. So a clear project purpose, why the project is needed and the problem you're addressing. Define goals and objectives, what you plan to accomplish, written in measurable terms. And then the project narrative or story. This is your chance to tell your story, who you are, your connection to the project, and why it matters. And then the budget and financial plan, which is what at the Regenerative Economies program we kind of help with also, is the budget and financial plan. It's just a detailed outline of how funds will be spent, and it's often broken down into categories like supplies, labor, equipment. And then next is the work plan and timeline, and these are specific activities and when they will happen. And then evaluation and outcome is just how you'll track the progress and measure results. And then a sustainability plan, how your project will continue after the grant funding ends. And these components are really just another way of asking, do you have a plan and can you carry it out? Next slide. So what are funders looking for when they read your proposal? Funders want to support a project that fits their mission and are in alignment with their priorities. For example, USDA might want to fund a conservation practice. Well, a foundation might want to fund a food sovereignty or youth program. They also want to see benefits beyond your operation. Like, will your project create jobs, strengthen native food systems, or share knowledge with others? So these are just kind of some of the things that like you should be thinking about or have already thought about, and then just having them written down. And then, do you have the capacity and readiness to manage the project successfully? Do you have the people, partnerships, and systems needed? They're also looking for this in the application for the most part. And then also accountability. Can you track spending, collect data, and submit reports on time? The funders need to know you'll be kind of like a good steward of their investment. So working with people can strengthen your application, and funders often like to see that you're not just working in isolation. So any partnerships and collaborations could also look very ideal to funders. And finally, funders are looking for projects that bring new solutions or address challenges that haven't been tackled yet. So they love innovation and they love seeing that in the application as well. So when you're writing your proposal, think from the funder's perspective. Would I trust this person or organization to deliver the project they described? If the answer is yes, your application will stand out. Next, please. So before you begin filling out any grant application, it's really important to check the eligibility requirements though. So some programs are designed for individual farmers or ranchers, while others require you to apply as a cooperative, a business entity, or even through your tribal government. There are also grants that are only open to beginning farmers, veterans, or youth. So they're very specific on who is applying. And then funders might also ask for things like a farm number, a business license, or financial records from past years. And so knowing these requirements ahead of time could save you a lot of frustration. Um, you don't want to spend hours putting together an application only to find out you weren't eligible in the first place. Another common requirement is having a fiscal sponsor. So this usually comes up when the grant money can only be given to nonprofits with a 501(c)(3) tax status. So if you're a producer who doesn't operate as a nonprofit, that's okay. You can partner with a nonprofit organization to act as your fiscal sponsor, and they'll receive the funds on your behalf, and then they'll just help manage the reporting requirements to like, meet that there. And so for producer groups, fiscal sponsorships could be a great option, just to open the door to grants you wouldn't otherwise be able to qualify for. Next slide.
One more thing on this slide, I do want to say something that is coming up more and more as we work with folks in today's day and age anyway, with the advancement of technology is consideration as to where your data might be going, or if you're operating in a space where you're utilizing a lot of traditional knowledge or knowledge that you might not want to be shared broadly in a way that some funders require for record keeping or reporting. Stuff like that might be something to keep in mind as well when you're doing this type of work to make sure that it aligns with how you want that information to be shared, or how they might be putting out graphics or sharing the data that you report on the grant. So that's something I also wanted to elevate too.
Yes, thank you, Abby, for that. Oh, we could go to the next slide. So, strategic planning is simply the process of taking your vision for your farm, ranch, or business and breaking it down into clear, actionable steps. A basic framework has a few parts that you should consider. So, your vision and mission, which is the big picture and where you want to go long term and why you do what you do every day. And then your goals and objectives. These are specific things you want to accomplish to move toward your vision. And then the action plans, these are the steps, timelines, and then the resources that you'll need. And then the evaluation and reflection. How will you know you succeeded? And then what will you measure and how will you adjust to everything? Funders want to see this type of framework in your grant proposal. It shows that your project isn't just an idea, but part of like a larger, well thought out plan. This also isn't a one-time process. You have to continue to like reevaluate and just assess where you're at. Um, Strategic planning should be something that you just revisit often and something you're always checking in on. Next slide. So there are a few tools that could help you stay organized and help out with the strategic planning process, like um, a SWOT analysis, SMART goals, a business model canvas, weekly or monthly planners, and then there's various online budgeting tools that you're able to use, or USDA or tribal resource guides. So whether you're a paper planner person or prefer digital tools, just the main key is to find something that you'll actually use. You could totally keep it simple and always add more details as your business or your project grows and develops. You don't need a bunch of fancy tools, just something you'll actually use. So I always say consistency is more important than complexity. And these are just some ideas, but there's many out there. Just keep in mind of all of these different tools. And then we could go to the next slide. Um, so a SWOT analysis or a situational analysis is a tool that just guides you and allows you to deep dive into internal elements that affect your business or project. And writing out and answering these questions, such as what are you good at, what's holding you back, what new opportunities are out there, and what risk do you need to watch out for? And these questions could really help you clarify your plan. And by identifying your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you can make smart decisions about how to grow, manage risk, and use time and resources wisely. Go to the next slide. Thank you. This is a visual for a SWOT analysis worksheet that we have created at IAC just to help producers identify these strengths and weaknesses in their operations. But this grid is just like how you could organize those insights and it helps you see the larger picture. And this is just another tool that once completed, the information could be added to your grant application. Like I said before, you don't need to be too complex. You could even do this with sticky notes or on a whiteboard or just a paper. It's also great to do with others, such as like partners or collaborators, family members, depending on who is part of the project you're um, applying for funding for. And in this worksheet, you could just start to think about each category. Strengths is which is internal positive, and these are capabilities that give your business a competitive edge. Like one example is strong community support, or a unique product or service that you're offering. Some weaknesses would be like limited access to capital, outdated technology, staff shortages, maybe the reasons why you're applying for the grant. And then opportunities, which are external and positive outcomes, such as partnerships, emerging markets, and then finally threats, which are outside challenges that could impact your goals or operations. Once you've done your SWOT analysis and identified your priorities, the next step is to map out your goals using the SMART Goals framework. And this framework just stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And SMART goals just don't make your business or project stronger. It could make your grant proposal stand out, and funders could see exactly what you plan to do and how you'll measure your success. Next slide. Now let's look at how we could break down big goals into specific action steps. And this kind of thinking is what funders want to see in grant applications. Clear, realistic goals backed up by concrete actions. And so I'll walk through a few of these examples. So our first goal is about food production. The objective here is to improve crop yields by 20% over 3 years while also meeting community needs. Notice how the measure note that it's measurable and time bound, and we have a clear target and timeline. And the action steps to get there include adopting soil practices like cover crops, composting, crop rotation, investing in soil testing, incorporating traditional growing practices. So taken together, these actions show a funder that this isn't just a dream, it's a well-planned path to higher yields and stronger community food systems. And then the second goal is about it kind of expanding markets. The objective is to enter into 2 new tribal regional markets within the next 12 months. Again, see how it's measurable and has a clear deadline. And the action steps are conducting market research to understand demand and pricing, attending trade shows, tribal food fairs, or local farmers markets to build that visibility, establishing distribution partnerships, whether that's with a tribal food hub, a cooperative, or any local grocery store. And this tells the funders that you're not just producing food, you're also creating a plan to get it into the hands of more people in your community and beyond. So, as you can see, each goal connects to a measurable objective and is supported by practical, actionable steps. And this is exactly the type of structure that makes grant applications stronger. It shows you're not just asking for money, you're presenting clear, achievable plan that creates real impact for your farm, your family, and your community. Go to the next slide. Another powerful tool for helping with strategic planning is a business model canvas. And this one-page visual framework could help you sort out those questions. These, especially the questions that the grant applications typically ask, but also lets you work through the entire process in kind of like a one page. I'm not going to go too much in detail in this, but the canvas does have like 9 key building blocks, which are the customer segments, the value propositions, channels, customer relationships, revenue streams, key resources, key activities, key partnerships, and cost structure. And by filling out each of these sections, you could clearly explain your operation in a way that funders understand. It's not just about what you produce, but how your entire system works together. So when you apply for a grant, you could pull all this information from your business model canvas directly into your application, which is why it's like just like another tool that could just help you answer the application questions. Now let's talk about budgeting and planning, which are some of the most important parts of a grant application. A grant budget shows not only how much money you need, but also that you have a realistic plan for how the funds will be used. When you're preparing for a budget for a grant, think about these categories: personnel or labor, if you're paying yourself, staff, or interns, adding that, supplies, materials, seeds, feed, fencing, tools, equipment, tractors, irrigation systems, processing equipment, then travel and transportation, fuel, mileage, delivering products, anything that you really need in these categories. And then also training and education. That's also really important to add too. It's like workshops, certifications, or technical assistance, things that you feel like would also enhance and allow you to meet your deliverables. And then the indirect cost or overhead, which are utilities, internet, office support, if it is allowed by the funder though. So that's why it's really important to look at the requirements. Most funders want you to break these expenses down into categories and explain why they're necessary for the project. There are also a few other important considerations for grant budgets, which is matching funds. Some grants require you to contribute your own funds or in-kind support, like labor, equipment, or land use, cash flow. Remember that some grants are reimbursable, so this means that you might have to spend money first and then get reimbursed. And that's why having reserves or a plan for upfront costs is important. And then the budget narrative. Don't just list numbers. Most most funders, like if not all, ask for a short explanation of each line item, why you need it, and how it connects to the project. And then reasonableness, like funders look at whether your numbers make sense. For example, if you say you'll build a greenhouse for $2,000, they may question whether that's realistic at the time, depending on um, other parts of your application, or where you're at in your project. And then consistency. Make sure your budget matches your proposal narrative. If you say you're planting 10 acres of corn, your supply cost should reflect that scale. So, um, funders kind of see the budget as a test. It shows whether you thought through the project carefully and whether you'll be responsible for the money that you could potentially get. But the bottom line is this, a clear and realistic budget does build confidence. It tells the funders, I know exactly how I'll use the funds and I planned it carefully. So combining with tools like the business model canvas, it could show your farm or ranch is not only grant ready, but also strategically positioned for growth. Next slide, please. So here's how your planning directly feeds into a strong application. Your vision and mission, it becomes your project narrative. Your budget goes into the grant budget forms. Your SWOT or needs assessment explains why your project matters. And then SMART goals typically become your outcome and evaluation section. And then the work plan and timeline just shows how you'll get it done. In other words, if you've done your strategic planning, you've already written half of the grant proposal, if not most. You would just need to put it into the funders format.
Yeah, getting your goals, mission, vision, budget, strategic plan, getting your, what you're doing on paper is arguably the hardest part of all of this, and that's the part where we come in. And then, yeah, like Dominique said, once you get to that point, each grant application is unique, but a lot of them have the same general structure. So you can kind of rinse and repeat a lot of that stuff once you have it written down and in a format that resonates with funders. Um, Sorry, I just jumped in there. Dominique, were you before we segue into Joey and I talking at people?
Oh no, you're fine. That's a very good explanation. And yeah, that was concluded my section.
Sweet. Well, in that case, I just accidentally made a perfect segue to Joey and I talking. So next slide, and I'll pass it over to Joey.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess just to start off, I just got done being on the opposite side of being a grant reviewer on a grant review committee and looking at these different applications. And it's just how important it is to be specific in a lot of the questions they're asking. Going through and seeing some of the applications, like you can see when someone's just kind of throwing I don't know, a Hail Mary out there to get some funding for a piece of equipment, or if it's something that they're really passionate about and wanting to make a longer term impact than more than a year. Seeing stuff like, I guess, when you're answering the grants questions, making sure like you're answering that specific question and being as detailed and specific on that specific question is going to go a long way. When, I guess, think of it as like if you're on the opposite end and you're reading your answer you're putting down, like, are you going to get the full picture out of it? So yeah, it just goes such a long way. And especially like what Dominique was saying on the budgeting costs. If you're just grouping all these costs into one thing and you're not putting each line item out and like the specific cost of it and maybe even a source on like where you got that cost from, when that person on the other end is reviewing your grants, it makes it really hard to score it well, because you're lost in the air. The grant reviewer isn't going and checking each source and making sure the funding is matching up there. So say you're just like 3,000 for a pack and wash station, or pack and wash station equipment, like, and just looping all the different parts into one line item. Usually it's not going to score, or you're going to get docked points on that part of it. So it just really goes, and like, as obvious as it may sound, but like reading each question fully and answering it. Like, I've seen a lot of grant applications where it's just they read half the question and just started going, and they didn't read the second half, and they totally answered the question wrong, or names your first and last name isn't even completed right, or the address isn't fully completed. So it's just like stuff like that. It really does go a long way. And if you do answer all the questions right in full detail and having those SMART goals where you can see a measurable impact, it goes a long way in the end. Especially, I guess, another point on that to make is just looking at the scoring criteria that are usually in the grant applications. You can see where the big points are and where to really focus on your grant applications. So pretty much just wanted to reiterate everything Dominique said, but as of just getting done with being a grant on the other side as a grant reviewer, like everything she said, it really does impact your grant application. So after that, I guess we're going to kind of move into where Abby and I and our technical assistance network comes in to assist in the grant application and all the other federal funding sources. So we both mentioned, I guess, to break it down, IAC, we're a tribal nonprofit. We're broken down into multiple different teams. Dominique is on our regenerative economies team, and then Abby and I, we fall under our technical assistance network. So what our technical assistance network is really the boots on the ground, and we have technical assistance spread across the whole entire country. We both mentioned that we're in the Great Lakes, but we have people out west in Alaska, southern parts, Oklahoma. So there's always somebody from our technical assistance network that kind of knows the region that maybe you are all based in more than, say, Abby and I would. So somebody out west, like I wouldn't be able to provide the best technical assistance to somebody out west versus here in the Great Lakes. So, but as I was saying, it's really just like the boots on the ground technical assistance. We're there to travel and meet producers face to face, tribal governments, build that relationship, kind of tour their agriculture operation and assist really where that producer is looking for. It can be a producer that's just beginning to be a beginning farmer or rancher and just needs help in navigating everything that is USDA, whether it's the farm loans, the crop insurance, the grant funding, cost share programs, whatever it is. There's so much out there to navigate. So for someone starting off, like it is so easy to get lost. And we're there to sit down, kind of go through step by step on where to start this process, what paperwork is needed, make connections to local USDA county offices and start building relationships there to get applications submitted. We're there to raise tribal initiatives to state, or I guess local, state, federal, or national levels, depending on what that initiative is. Working with the local state conservationists to bring new conservation priorities to the top and have them think about implementing those into as a conservation practice in that state. It's all over. Like I know, I guess here myself, I'm going all over, but that's like what our technical assistance network is. It ranges so far and wide depending on what that specific producer is looking for. When we're talking about grants, we're there to help again, navigate the grant program. We can review the grants, help answer questions, make connections with whatever USDA agency it is to get those questions answered. And then, as I mentioned, we can review the grants. Just having a second set of eyes review the grants before submission can go a long way too. And yeah, I guess on top of that, that's our technical assistance, but then say we're working with a tribal government and they have their own grant writer and they're just looking for certain funding out there. We're always sharing grant resources and grant opportunities when they come out so we can push those out. And then there's also our Native youth and professional development opportunities. I guess coming up, there should be some opportunities coming through IAC for Native youth, hosting youth field days, hosting youth summits. A lot of this information, or if you're looking for these certain events, can be found on our website. But yeah, I guess it really does just matter or come down to what that producers were looking to do with their operation, where they're at in it, and what sort of technical assistance they need. So with that, we can go to the next slide. And this is just the breakdown of our technical assistance network. So there are 14 regions here, and I guess you all can see, depending on what state you're located in, what region you fall under and how we break down our regions Originally, I see we were following the BIA regions, but we saw a need to break the certain regions down further to provide more technical assistance. It was just too far and wide to have technical assistance. I guess producers, there's more producers that needed technical assistance, so we broke it down more to better serve the producers. And so here again, this can be found on our website. A lot of this information can. If you just go to indianag.org, and we can put it in the chat as well. You can go to your region, find out who your point of contact is, reach out to them, as well as just reach out to I mean, you can really reach out to anybody in the IAC, and they'll make sure you get connected with the right person. But yeah, with that, I think we can move on to Abby and discuss where we can find some of these funding resources.
For sure. Trina, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we talked a lot about grants and how to form an application, and what might go into that and what to consider. Where can you actually find them? Because they are everywhere, but they're also simultaneously hard to find for some reason. And so there's a whole plethora at different levels, from federal to local to private. So some examples that we wanted to provide on where we typically find grants. In the agriculture realm, we work really closely with USDA just because a lot of our funding comes from USDA. And so at the federal level, you've got the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Rural Development, Farm Service Agency, the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, which a lot of people sleep on because they don't realize that the urban agriculture grants under USDA include reservations, and on tribal land, you don't have to be in a city to be eligible for a lot of their grants. So I want to put that out there too. But on a smaller scale as well, we've got, each state agriculture department or relevant department, if there's rural development or natural resources focus is at the state level, there's usually a lot of grants available at that front. Um, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education entity, they are situated regionally similar to IAC. We work a lot with them because their grants are typically a little bit smaller compared to some of the federal numbers, but there's usually not a match. Their grant application is super easy to fill out. They're pretty broad and they're really easy. So I love elevating SARE where I can, because they have a lot of good opportunities. First Nations Development Institute, philanthropic entities are another big one. They, are a lot of people don't realize the opportunities are just in the local community. So, county foundations, community trusts, and just local philanthropic funds. They, a lot of the time, especially lately, might have farm related or food sovereignty related or just generally community enhancing priorities that they want to put their funding towards. And so, even if they might not be officially putting grants out there, just being in communication with some of these community organizations might get you funding when you didn't think that you could get funding in those areas. So that's definitely something to look into as well. Local community development entities. The BIA Access to Capital Clearinghouse, and I can throw all of these links in the chat too, to a lot of these. But the ones on the right here are a little bit more broad. So the BIA Access to Capital Clearinghouse is basically just a conglomerate of all federal grants, and I don't know how often they update it anymore, but when this first came out, it's really useful to, if you're looking for something specific. So a lot of folks were looking for funding for a new boat for a fishery, or, equipment of a specific kind, or water infrastructure, stuff like that. You can go to this Access to Capital Clearinghouse and just type in some keywords into their search bar, and all federal opportunities that might fall under that category will come up, and you can kind of play around with that. Um, All federal awards are also situated under grants.gov. And so I will say if you are wanting to explore federal grants at any point, a grants.gov and a sam.gov account is something that you should have, and a sam.gov account is also required to apply to a federal grant. And sometimes that process to get uh, your account activated can take a couple months. So that might be something to explore if you think you might want to apply for federal grants anytime soon, preparing ahead of time because oftentimes the grant like the request for applications, the open period is only 3 months, so if you're just starting to like you don't want to be wait until the last minute or having to wait months to get your account activated. So that's something that you can do ahead of time. The Tribal Funding Registry, they focus a little bit more heavily on grant funding specific to tribal governments and tribal enterprises and entities. But there is some stuff in there. Sorry, we've got somebody at our door, so the dogs are barking. There are some opportunities on this tribal funding registry that are specific to producers or 501(c)(3)s or however you're situated as well. So it might be worth checking out. Our partners at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative have a funding opportunities webpage on their website that is always got some interesting opportunities on there. Again, I'm not sure, as capacities shift, how often it's updated and stuff like that, but that's something that I wanted to put out there as well. And then just, email newsletters, social media. We have at IAC, within each region, we have like a Facebook page. So Joey and I operate the Great Lakes Region Facebook page. And I know anytime I see a grant opportunity or anything related, I'm sharing it to that Facebook page because a lot of producers, a lot of folks might not have email, but it seems like everybody has Facebook. So that is a way to get some information on that front as well. Um, and let's see. I think that was everything I wanted to say on this slide. I will start throwing some links in the chat to some of these opportunities, and then we can go to the next slide. I think that was it for our slides, and I'm really excited. It seemed like there were some good questions coming in as well.
Yeah, thank you, Abby and Joey and Dominique, Miigwech. Thank you for your time and your expertise and all this practical guidance that's really needed right now. We did get a handful of questions, and so we're going to transition to the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left for that. And so folks can still ask questions in the chat or using the Q&A function. And we've been tracking questions as they've come in throughout the presentation, so we'll go through those now. Okay, so first one is an easy one. So is the SWOT worksheet available for download and printing? And then
Yes.
same, will we be emailing the slide deck? I think that's an easy yes.
Yeah, those worksheets could be available and I'll like send them over so they can get distributed.
Miigwech. Okay, and then we were working on understanding the question about fiscal sponsors. And so in the meantime, I was hoping that you could talk about maybe some tips on the fiscal sponsorship relationship and what that usually looks like. Do they take a cut if they're your fiscal sponsor, things like that. And then maybe even if there's any red flags that can pop up when you're forming that relationship.
For sure. I can start and then I can pass it over to Dominique and Joey. But there's pros and cons for fiscal sponsorship. In my experience, personally, I'm in my role as a TA, I typically only see fiscal sponsorship utilized when a farmer or a collaboration of people or a food project doesn't have a legal status, so isn't a 501(c)(3), or just doesn't have the administrative capabilities to maintain reporting requirements. And so, for example, we had a project that was wanting to build some processing infrastructure. So it had a clear start and a clear finish. And so the folks operating the project went to a a community nonprofit and said, hey, this is the project that we want to, work on, what we want to do. We want to build this processing facility. And, would you be willing to be a fiscal sponsor or partner with us on some grants to fund the equipment and the labor, stuff like that? And so because the project was temporary in nature, the fiscal sponsorship made sense. So the project could just focus on building the infrastructure once they got the funding and then moving on to the next community needs and kind of dissolving that partnership from there. So I know, and Tony, I know y'all I'm not as familiar with utilizing fiscal sponsorship if you already have 501(c)(3) status, or if you're operating as a legal entity already. There's probably pros and cons to doing it. But if you have the administrative capability to just apply to the grant yourself or work in partnership instead of having kind of a hierarchy of power between the partners, I would definitely probably go that route instead of a fiscal sponsorship. But yeah, making sure if you are utilizing a fiscal sponsor, making sure you have that pre-approved relationship ahead of a grant application submission or award. So you aren't navigating that after an award is given, especially if it is something that you're having to navigate, like, hey, the fiscal sponsor got all this money. We didn't hash out how that was going to work. And now they took it all and we don't have anything for ourselves. And that was not the intent. So, yeah, but having a fiscal sponsor, in my experience, usually just helps alleviate commitment on your end as a producer if that's not something that you want to commit to as far as administrative needs. But yeah, I'll pass it to Dominique and Joey if there's anything else on there. I don't even know if I answered that question, but that's my experience anyway.
I do not have any more. I think you answered it well. And yeah, I see Tony just mentioned he did. So we will leave that there.
Okay, sweet. Also, hi, Tony, fellow Michigander.
Yeah, thank you, Tony, and thanks for giving us a real example to respond to. And glad to hear you got your question answered. Okay, and then we had one question from Manzanita. How do partnerships look? Who are eligible partners? So we may need more context to answer that. If you could add that in the chat.
Depends. It depends.
It depends.
Yeah, which is like the worst answer. I know people hate it when we give that answer, but for some examples, there are research grants that require you to have at least 2 partners or letters of support from a tribal college or from a university to support the research grant. Or Joey, I don't remember how it's worded in like the Resilient Food Systems Partnership or Regional Food Systems Partnership grants, but the grant will typically tell you if they are requiring partnership or collaboration, what that requirement is and who you're supposed to be partnering with, and if there's a minimum amount of people, stuff like that. And then if it doesn't say, if it's not something that's outlined in the request for applications that they put out for the grant, sometimes they don't specify. Sometimes they'll just say a collaborative of producers is an eligible applicant or something like that. That gives you an opportunity to partner with other producers on your grant if you want to, but it's not required. Yeah. So it depends.
Right. And then I just wanted to uplift one of the questions too from the Q&A. Joe was asking, would it be appropriate to include hyperlinks to show where the cost amount for supplies or equipment came from, or would multiple hyperlinks be viewed as administratively burdensome? And Joey said, yes, having hyperlinks to show where the cost of the item came from is super helpful. It is a much more reliable source than just saying local agriculture store or Home Depot, for example.
Yeah, I guess on the to just go on more on that, like on the opposite side as a grant reviewer, when you see that, just breaking down the budget table and being able to click on it and see that it's an accurate number. I think Dominique was kind of mentioning it before, but just to get a gauge if the project is realistic or doable, or if they're asking for more money than probably needed for the grant funding. Because even then on that end, there's always like I guess for the one I did, I can't say there's always, but there's an option for full funding, limited, or was it full funding, partial funding, or no funding, as can be the options that the grant reviewer has. So if you're kind of over exaggerating or under exaggerating the costs of some of the items, it may fall under where they're like only going to partially fund it. So, but having those sources and having them be accurate goes a long way with, especially the hyperlink. It's easier for the person reviewing to click on the hyperlink, see that the costs match up versus typing in from Home Depot and having to go on Home Depot site, look at the item you listed, where there could be multiple of the same type of item, and trying to figure out which one you were actually gonna look at purchasing. So yeah.
I would say don't include a ton of hyperlinks. Having something to support why you're asking for that amount of money for that purpose is just fine. And it also, some grants will require that, especially if they're grant funding for equipment in particular. But it also helps the grantor know that they oftentimes, and don't tell them I told you this, are not giving you enough money for the thing that they're telling you to buy with that funding. For an example, we've got a grant going here specific to prioritizing producers buying refrigerated vehicles to aid in like food distribution, food transportation. The cap is $100,000 for, and I think there's an even further limitation on how much of that you can use towards buying a new refrigerated truck. These days, I don't know where you're getting a brand new refrigerated vehicle for less than $100,000, but it's stuff like that that can help, especially in a really an industry like food systems and farming and food in general, where the markets and the costs for things are so volatile and constantly changing. Having, hey, this is how much it costed when I applied for this grant. By the time you awarded me the funds, it now costs way more, or it now costs this much. So having that baseline hyperlinked in your application, or provided via however you want to incorporate that information is really good too as you become awarded, and if you have to edit your budget at all due to changes in costs of things.
Yeah, thanks for that, Abby. I guess for the one my example in my head, I was thinking these were pieces of equipment under the 5,000, but in that instance where it is a really large sum of money, yeah, that is going to go a long way if it increases by a couple thousand and you're under, if your application is under the new cost. So I would, yeah, I guess it might depend on some of that stuff as well and kind of go case by case. But also, the sources are, or at least can be, a part of the criteria and receive points based on how accurate or if there are sources per item. So think about that as well.
Thank you, Joey. And we are about at time, and thank you all so much for your questions. I think we have one more that I was gonna have us answer. So I know this happened the last time we hosted this webinar. It's this information that people really want right now. So thank you all for your questions. And then before folks transition out, please take a second to complete our short evaluation survey. Maria put it in the chat. So please take a second to do that before we close. And yeah, the final question was, is there any good place to go for information on the difference between applying as an individual versus an LLC or a sole proprietorship?
I see technical assistance number. We can help kind of navigate that, but one-stop shop, I don't know.
Good answer. Good answer.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you three so much for sharing your information again. And on behalf of NAFSA, yeah, thank you to the Intertribal Agriculture Council for presenting Grants 101. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. So appreciate you taking the time to learn more. And then a reminder that the session was recorded and will be available on the NAFSA YouTube channel. We appreciate the important work you all are doing in our communities to support tribal food sovereignty and hope today's session provided tools you can use moving forward. Chi miigwech, thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.